Fantastic. So with that, I'm going to bring in Ludovine now to the discussion. So Gijsbert, as you know, Ludovine is maybe more of the French persuasion. So in this room, we're great. We've got the mushroom pickers and we have the bear spotters. Ludovine, before I then go around the panel and just ask everybody to maybe just finish on a final thought with regards to, was there something from today's or this first session today where you thought, I'm going to remember that, that's really useful, or something that you really didn't agree with? So we'll go to that in a second. But firstly, I'm going to ask for Ludovine's perspective with regards to this conversation around culture, and perhaps Ludovine as well, the fact that you've spent a huge amount of time in West Africa, so maybe seeing some of those cultural differences as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. It was an enlightening morning. I have to say what strikes me is that a lot of the stakeholders we're used to dealing with, we engage with them, whether it's local governments or, host country governments in faraway places or communities, we sort of automatically grasp that we're going to have to bridge some gaps. What I find really interesting today is that we are dealing with a whole new set of stakeholders and we expect perfect understanding. So I do a lot of work for US and EU policy shapers trying to bridge the gaps between what they think, hear, or wish of the mining and minerals industry. So already we're talking about a topic nobody can really cover. And a lot of them are really put off by the fact that it's hard for them to grasp the usual sort of, places where they connect. And I think as much difficulty as we may have talking amongst ourselves, dealing with this whole new group of stakeholders and reaching out to them and making ourselves understood is vital. And it's a hard job. And I really see there the lack of trust, but also the fact that we don't use the same words for the same things. I am regularly asked in those discussions, so what is exactly your area of expertise? And it tends to create huge stress when I say I'm a really good generalist. So I think all of these conversations we're having almost amongst ourselves, we all connect to some aspect of mineral value chains. Bringing them to people who are trying to understand mining, regulate it or shift it towards their priorities at the same time as we're shifting around all the time, I think that's a huge endeavor. So I'm just very aware that each of us also connects to these policy shapers, and I'd love to know how you're taking all of this experience to those conversations.
Thanks for that, Ludovine. We'll come back to that in a second. I've just got one more question to ask you, and that is, so we're all sitting here looking at one another going, oh yes, we've got people from all over the world, but we're all speaking English. I suspect most of us use a knife and a fork to eat from a cultural perspective. Within the world at the moment, and Amanda, you spoke about China, for example, and I think perhaps a lot of the fear that is within raw material supply chains at the moment is because we don't understand one another. We're very different from a cultural basis, etc. I've had the opportunity to work a little bit within China, and again, as soon as you start understanding one another, it's fantastic. But before you get to that point, you're terrified of offending other people in the room. So there's something here as well, Ludovine, perhaps around in that broad interconnected mineral space that, again, from a cultural perspective and a country perspective, certain parts of the world are very anti-China. Other parts of the world are more open to working with China. But I think there's also a base underlining of we just don't really understand one another because we're so different. What do you think of that as a comment?
I think that's really true. And I think when you hear those positions, what's even more important is trying to understand the stories we tell ourselves and we tell each other about those positions. So most of my work happens in Africa. And I hear a lot of assumptions about how African countries, stakeholders could position, on the EU versus US versus China kind of, discussion. And I think part of the problem is we are telling ourselves stories about China, we're telling ourselves stories about ourselves, and everybody else is telling themselves stories about the same thing. So taking the time to hear those stories is interesting. I also think there are many cultures where the official story does not reflect the lived story. Yeah, in most of the countries where I work in West Africa, there is an official version that's carried by somebody who is allowed to speak. There are a whole series of stakeholders who may violently disagree, but would never say it out loud. So, we're bridging visible and invisible gaps, so to speak. So yeah, I'm very interested right now and sometimes concerned by the narratives, the stories we tell about CRM needs, about how we plan to use CRMs, how those stories are received elsewhere. And this was mentioned yesterday in the other session. The way we speak about metal demand as being an absolute, oddly, does not really help with shaping a collaborative answer to that demand and to that need. And then when you pile in with everything Amanda told us, which is, we absolutely demand it and need it, but we may change our mind in 3 days because, we might change technologies. There are a lot of stakeholders who say, well, come back when you know. Of course, by that point, the 10 years of exploration that we need, are no longer possible. So we're dealing with stories, but also with timelines on how these stories play out.
Thanks for that, Ludovine. So stories, timelines, visible and invisible bridges. Fantastic. So just to wrap up on this morning's session, maybe Amanda, if I come to yourself first, seeing as you were cited a number of times just there, do you have any final words of wisdom to share with us or reflections with regards to what you've heard? And then I'll go to Kimo.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of elephants in the room in materials. One of the things I'd like to say, and this is a personal opinion, is the geopolitical tug of war going on between China and the rest of the world, with places like Africa in the middle, is huge. And China needs a little bit of credit. They saw the need for raw materials and different raw materials and raw material supply chains before we did. They were willing to go around the world and secure those supply chains, and they have spent a huge amount of time understanding the complexities of how those supply chains work. We have just woken up as if we were in a stupor, and after spending 10 years screaming about climate change, we realized the practical realities of what we need to do, or some of them, not all of them, some of the practical realities, because I don't think the West has any idea what it really needs to do to energy transition, or it's got this much of an idea, there's this much more to do. And they're like, well, China stole it all, and China's a nasty person, don't work with them. But they're completely disrespecting the amount of time and effort and work and understanding China has developed in this area, and how much work we need to do. And we do have, all the people in this room are experts in their own way in the raw materials and understanding all the stakeholders. But the global raw materials supply chains are really complex worlds full of stakeholders, and we need to understand them if we're going to make the energy transition. And my sort of, what I have to say is there's a combination of understanding and reality, and realities, business realities, geostatistical realities that we need to understand if we're going to make the energy transition. And making an attempt to understand all of that before saying, I want this, is going to be essential, because we are never going to get an energy transition if we demand it. We're going to get it if we roll up our sleeves and try to understand the complexities of getting one.
Excellent. Thanks, Amanda. We're not going to get it if we demand it. We actually have to do something. So brilliant. Thank you. Timo, do you have any final reflections? And then I'll go to Gijsbert.
Thank you. So I think that we are in a difficult situation. We need mining more than ever, and this need offers great opportunities for mining business. But at the same time, mining must change to get the social license to operate in that scale that the world is needing. But the problem is that perhaps the mining companies, the growth that they are looking for, it's possible that the growth rate that they are looking for can be achieved without any huge changes, but that growth rate is not enough for the global needs. So how we can make the needs of mining sector to meet the needs of rest of the world and develop together the more responsible, more sustainable mining. I think it's possible. If some other sectors has done that, why not mining? But there's great need to cooperate from to different stakeholders, and that's excellent. That what we have done today, we need much more of this kind of common understanding events in the future. Thank you, Sarah, for arranging this, and I'm really sorry I need to jump out. I start another webinar in 3 minutes.
Oh, good luck. Thank you very, very much, Timo. It's been fantastic.
So much, and it was so good to hear all of you. Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Gijsbert, I wouldn't take that as an offensive gesture by the Finn. I believe that he did have another webinar, and I say this with a big smile on my face just to make sure that nobody is misunderstanding my British sarcasm there at all. But Gijsbert, do you have any reflections? And then we'll finish off with Vanessa.
Yeah, well, I think we're underestimating the transition, that what the energy transition, or doing something about climate change, or however you want to phrase this, what this actually means in practice. I think, you know, discussions about trust and about setting common goals and understanding are fundamental, and to create awareness and also the humility to really recognize, okay, well, we do certain things that might not be beneficial and we need to change, related to, for example, saying that you're a leader in ESG or a leader in this or that. That is a kind of a closing statement. We need to be much more open, I think, and pragmatic, and also kind of move on in a I think, communal emotional growth. Europe has been for quite a while been at the forefront, to use that word, of driving awareness around climate change, and screaming at the Americans and the Chinese, for example, to do something about it. Now they do something, and it's also not good. So come on, just celebrate that and start doing your own thing, and add to that, and really take that to the next level. Because one thing I'm a bit worried about is that we say that, well, in Europe we can leverage and enforce standards and ESG targets, etc., by leveraging the single market. But if we don't produce anything, we don't have a single market. We cannot afford it. Maybe it sounds a bit blunt, but I think we need to very much look at building also industrial capacity in Europe to make a change. And this relates to some of the other speakers talking about pragmatic steps, because otherwise, if we don't have the tools to have a sustainable economy, we only are sustainable, and Europe becomes green for the wrong reasons. So on that positive note, thank you.
I'll let you go back to picking mushrooms. Thank you very, very much, Gijsbert. Fantastic. And to finish with, we'll go all the way down to Western Australia. Vanessa, any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I do see that we're nearly out of time, so I will be brief. Probably the big thing that I just loved about this conversation is our honesty to realize that we've got to do better, and really looking at bringing in all of those skills that we all have, but in a way that we've just got to do it better. But there are two things that really stuck out for me, and I've never heard of social vectors before, and I don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to be doing in that, but you know, Ludovine, you said something that just, I think it was you, where you just said, we've got new groups of stakeholders that we've never had before, and we need to communicate with them about things that their knowledge of might not be, you know, the same as what ChatGPT used to give us that idea right at the beginning. So I wanted to end on that by saying, with our ability and our knowledge, and maybe being honest and acknowledging that we do need to speak with maybe a bit more authority in what we don't know, I think that's a fairly good place to say, well, I don't know all of these things, but you've got some help, and let's work on this together. Because I do believe it's possible. So I do believe that trusted mining is possible.
I think there's absolutely, Vanessa. And so I think to finish on that note of vectors, so Chris and Emily, I'll give it another push. So on Friday afternoon, come along to the open launch. It's an open research program. So if you want to come and explore what is actually meant by social vectors, the big secret is we don't know yet. I suspect, is that the case, Chris? Emily? Yeah, so it's part of what's being researched as part of the program, which is great. So yes, admitting that there's loads of stuff that people don't know about. And then as well, to give Emily's request a push, if anybody is interested or knows of somebody that you think might enjoy being a part of the independent ethics committee for the research project, then please do feel free to get in touch with Emily, or go on the Vector website or take a look at those QR codes. Thank you very much, Chris. There we go. So with that, everybody, it's just gone 11 o'clock for me here in the UK. We've got our second last session of this year's Responsible Raw Materials Conference happening later on this afternoon. So it kicks off at 3 o'clock and rolls through to 6 o'clock UK time, which of course is just about okay for all of the lovely people in North and South America. This afternoon, we're being joined by everyone from Carlos for the Ministry of Mining in Chile, all the way through to individuals who work with lots of different communities in Alaska with regards to mining projects. And again, of course, we've got one or two experts sprinkled throughout who maybe don't do a lot with mining, but do a lot with regards to trust. We will then finish off this year's conference tomorrow morning. So starting off again at 8 a.m. UK time and finishing at 11. And at which point in time, Ludovine, Rose and I will attempt to summarize what we have heard this year, which is going to be a challenge.